Hello there, you're watching the nightly news program coming to you live on All 24 News Channel from Algiers. Next are today's top stories. Attaf considers Algeria's election as a non-permanent member of the Security Council an achievement within the framework of renewing its contribution as an active force for peace. Also coming up, the circle of clashes between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces is expanding. The African Union warns of the country slide into a civil war with regional repercussions amid a comprehensive and continuous collapse of the health system. Also ahead, days before a draft law was presented in the Knesset to impose a temporal and capital or spatial division of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Palestinian government warns of a settlement plan to isolate Al-Quds and calls for Arab and international action. And the battles escalate in eastern Ukraine for the second day in a row. Kyiv announces the first results of the counterattack by recovering 4 towns in Donetsk, and Russia repels an attack on its fleet in the Black Sea, while NATO conducts the largest air maneuver in its history. Those were today's top stories. Welcome to the details. First off in our topical news, Algerian Prime Minister Mr. Ayman bin Abdurrahman presided on Monday in Algiers over a ceremony celebrating the election of Algeria as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. The ceremony took place at the International Conference Center in the presence of senior state officials as well as government members. Sarah Ferjani with the details.
Algeria celebrates its brilliant and well-deserved election with an overwhelming majority as non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for the term 2024-2025, a genuine tribute to Algeria for its constructive and active role in managing international affairs as well as its relentless efforts to maintain peace and stability on both regional and international stages.
وإن كانت انتخابات السادس من جوان
June's 6th election prepares for assuming responsibility in the Security Council. Hence, I would like to congratulate the President of the Republic as the head of our country's foreign policy. And I particularly commend the great care he has given to this file in its various aspects and in its smallest details.
The North African country gives credits to 3 main organizations for their distinguished diplomatic work to have Algeria join the UN Security Council, as the Algerian Foreign Minister puts it.
This election came in a distinguished diplomatic appearance by 3 organizations, namely the African Union, the League of Arab States, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, all of which adopted Algeria's candidacy. And with this step, strengthened the chances of our country by providing it with broad regional and international support.
By accessing the UN main organ, Algiers seeks to put forward during its next term comprehensive approaches to contribute in a lasting resolution to persistent issues troubling the world.
Algeria vows to work in the Security Council to encourage the adoption of comprehensive and participatory approaches to contribute to addressing the root causes of challenges, such as the scourges of terrorism and organized crime in all its forms, or the dangers of climatic changes and natural disasters, while taking care of their effects and damages, especially in developing countries.
Algeria's accession is truly regarded as a win for the African continent's just causes, as they are underrepresented, and also an opportunity to raise the voice of many who are struggling to defend their rights to freedom and national security and safety, as well as their inalienable right to self-determination.
Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, received on Monday a phone call from his Belgian counterpart, Ms. Haja Habib, who congratulated Algeria on its election as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for the period of 2024 to 2025. A statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry indicated that the 2 sides reviewed the development of relations between the 2 countries in both the political and economic aspects and touched on the partnership relations between Algeria and the European Union. An investigation by the Algerian magazine, the military magazine Al Jaish, revealed important details and figures regarding Morocco's policies and attempts to drown Algeria with cross-breeding cannabis, which constitutes a lucrative official business for the biggest producer and importer of this kind of drugs in the world, according to the International Narcotics Control Board. The investigation also revealed the various methods used in the production of this kind of drugs, particularly including cross-breeding methods used by producers to increase yields and quality of the drug with the aim of raising the THC levels. Two months of war have been sufficient for the Sudanese healthcare system to reach near downfall, with many civilians complaining from scarcity of medicine and medical staff. The war in Sudan have left thousands of injuries and hundreds of deaths, including 20 doctors who have been killed in the fighting, according to Doctors Union. The report is signed by Usama Ayadi.
The rise of clashes in Sudan and the intensification of security threats on the biggest region make civilians live dire humanitarian situation. The festering conflicts and disruptions caused scarcity of medical resources and urgency for humanitarian aid, making the medical system on the brink of collapse, as 70% of medical institutions were shut down. As for the ones still operating, they're facing scarcity and disruptions of power, fuels, medicines, and professional personnel.
Our medical supplies are mainly donated by humanitarian organizations and groups. Some organizations provide supplies while others provide transportation support. But to be frank, these supplies are far from enough to sustain us for a week.
According to officials working in the last hospital still operating in Omdurman, they mainly rely on their own generators, as the city only offers a few hours of power and water supply each day. Medical supplies such as antibiotics and painkillers have already run out, forcing them to suspend some services such as obstetrics and neonatal emergency, among others. Patients, on the other hand, not only have security hazards on their trip to the hospitals, but also suffer from lack of medicine and treatment, even if they reach there.
I haven't received dialysis for 10 days now, and it makes me painful and exhausted. I can't get treatment. Even aspirin is not available in the hospital. I have to find other ways to buy it, but sometimes I can't even find gauze and syringes.
Many patients are mired in the stalemate of having nowhere to go for medical treatment. Even if they arrive at the hospital, they often face the dilemma of shortage of doctors and medicine. The situation is even more disturbing for some critically ill patients, and sometimes even for healthcare workers themselves, seeing that 20 doctors have been killed since the start of the war.
To Djibouti now, and in a related matter, on Monday, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development Summit presented a new plan to end the crisis in Sudan, as clashes and explosions continue in different parts of Khartoum. For his part, the Djibouti President, Ismail Omar Guelleh, confirmed that the IGAD countries will study ways to persuade the army and the rapid support forces in Sudan to conduct a dialogue that guarantees an effective ceasefire, adding that the IGAD has the necessary mechanisms to make the Sudanese parties meet at the negotiating table. In Africa still, Nigeria's new president, Bola Tinubu, stated that his decision to remove a popular petrol subsidy would impose an extra burden on citizens, but this would free up money for education, regular power supply, transport infrastructure, and healthcare. The subsidy had kept petrol prices cheap for decades in Africa's biggest economy, but it became increasingly costly for the country, leading to wider budget deficits and driving up government debt.
Of the decisive victory of Chief MKO, I gave effect to the decision taken by my predecessor in office to remove the fuel subsidy, the albatross, and free up the collective use of much needed resources, which had hitherto been pocketed by a few rich. I admit the decision will impose extra burden on the masses of our people. I feel your pain, This is one decision we must bear to save our country from going under.
At the beginning of the weekly cabinet session, the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh stressed the need for imposing sanctions against Zionist entity, which violates the security or the sanctity, of the Holy Aqsa Mosque. Meanwhile, raids of Zionist forces continue in the West Bank, where many Palestinians, including minors, were arrested. More with Islam said.
The Zionist authorities keep on provoking Palestinians through their unjust laws and their massive raids and arrest campaigns. Just recently, the occupation forces detained several Palestinians, including a 60-year-old man with his son, in all of Nablus and Ramallah districts. Their abuses and crimes did not spare anyone. In truth, during a military raid south of Jenin, a Palestinian youth was shot by Zionist gunfire, while dozens suffered from suffocation. For its part, the Palestinian authorities kept denouncing Zionist provocative acts at every occasion. This time it's the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh who warned against passing a Zionist law that imposes the temporal and spatial division of Al-Aqsa Mosque, calling for imposing sanctions against the Zionist entity.
There must be an Arab, Islamic and international move that goes beyond the terms of condemnation to impose sanctions that prevent any change in the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque and stop any violation of Islamic and Christian sanctities in the city.
Shtayyeh also called for real international pressure to stop the occupation from implementing a settlement plan aimed at isolating Al-Quds and dividing the West Bank into two separate areas.
We call for real international pressure to stop Israel's implementation of the settlement plan, which has become known as the Iwan area, which aims to undermine the chances of establishing a Palestinian state through building a new colony, which will result in division of the West Bank into two separate areas. This will also result in dangerous consequences for security and peace in the region and the world.
International reactions regarding the settlement plans included White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby, who expressed the White House's long-made concerns regarding additional Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank.
We have long made clear our concerns about additional settlements in the West Bank, that we don't want to see actions taken that are going to make a two-state solution that much more difficult to achieve. We don't want to see steps taken that only increase the tensions, and we've been very clear about that. Nothing's changed about our policy.
The expansion of settlements carries on defying all international laws and conventions, pushing Palestinians away from their homeland. Recently, Netanyahu's government promoted for more than 7,000 new housing units in the West Bank.
Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Nasser Kanani stated on Monday that his country and the United States could exchange prisoners soon if Washington shows goodwill. This comes a day after Iran's supreme leader signaled the possibility of reaching a nuclear agreement with the West.
The talks in Muscat have not been secret. As I said, we've been holding indirect talks with the U.S. through intermediaries, and particularly through good office by Omani officials. It's part of the ongoing process.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi arrived on Monday in Venezuela to begin a tour to Latin America that includes Nicaragua and Cuba, with the aim of strengthening political and economic relations between Tehran and the three countries. According to the Iranian news agency, before leaving Tehran airport for Venezuela, Raisi described the relations between Iran and Latin American countries as strategic, saying that their common position is to stand up to the hegemonic regime and confront unilateralism. To the Russia-Ukraine file now, Russian forces thwarted an attempt by Ukrainian forces to conduct a reconnaissance operation to test the readiness of Russian forces, while Ukrainian forces said that they captured a 7th village in a cluster of settlements in the southeast. Let's follow the details in Sofian Kinturi's report.
The war in Ukraine seems never-ending, and the tides keep bouncing in and off. While Russian Defense Ministry is reporting its forces repelled several rounds of attacks from Ukraine, Ukrainian Defense Ministry says the country's forces made further advances in the southeast.
At first, the enemy resisted, tried to repel our attack with artillery. We managed to take initiative into our hands and slowly, house by house, we started to recapture the village. Approximately, we killed 10 enemy soldiers and took 4 prisoners.
As the fighting keeps on grinding, possible collateral damage could affect Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This made the International Atomic Energy Agency raise concern over the level of water used to cool the reactors of the power plant. Nonetheless, combat readiness is legitimate for both sides. Thus, Russia's defense ministry signed a contract with Chechen special forces, bringing them under the control of Russia, as Moscow tries to assert its control over private armies fighting on its behalf.
Today, a fairly large number of units, volunteer detachments and other military formations are active in the special military operation, together with the units of the armed forces, to increase the effectiveness of the use of the volunteer units under the leadership of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Vladimir Putin, and the Minister of Defense.
As for diplomatic peace efforts to end the crisis, leaders of 7 African countries could visit Ukraine and Russia this week to discuss a peace initiative. However, for U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the counteroffensive operation led by Ukraine is the only option to force Putin to come to the negotiating table.
Ukraine's success in the counteroffensive would do 2 things. It would strengthen its position at any negotiating table that emerges, and it may have the effect as well of actually causing Putin to finally focus on negotiating an end to the war that he started.
Away from the battleground, on the day of Russia's national holiday, President Putin ordered servicemen who were wounded in Ukraine, stressing the importance of this military operation in defense of his nation, especially amidst US and European allies' attempts to tighten encirclement against Russia.
An air deployment exercise billed as the biggest in NATO's history and hosted by Germany got underway on Monday. The Air Defender 2023 drill was long planned but serves to showcase the alliance's capabilities. The first planes took off on Monday morning from airfields in northern Germany. Some 10,000 participants and 250 aircraft from 25 nations will practice responding to a simulated attack on a NATO member.
Die Übung auch ein sehr gutes Zeichen.
That is why the exercise is also a very good sign that we are transatlantically ready for action, that we work together in a multinational context, that we can rely on each other. And when we know, as I have learned today, that the American soldiers have moved here to one's turf and to the exercise areas within a few days, 10 days, then that also gives us a feeling of security. Namely, that we can defend ourselves in an emergency. We hope that this emergency will not happen, but we are in a position to defend our alliance, our country, our values, our peace, and our freedom within the transatlantic alliance.
To other news in Europe, the former Italian Prime Minister and the historic President of Milan, Silvio Berlusconi, has passed away at the age of 86 as he suffered from a number of health problems in the past few years and experienced a major heart surgery in 2016. Berlusconi was transferred to a hospital in Milan on Friday due to what his aides described as undergoing pre-planned medical examinations linked to leukemia. For her part, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni bid farewell to former Premier Silvio Berlusconi on Monday.
Silvio Berlusconi was most of all a fighter. He was a man who never feared to defend his beliefs. It was that courage, that determination, which made him one of the most influential men in Italy's history, which allowed him to make real breakthroughs in politics, in communications, in the business world.
According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's report released on Monday, the nuclear arsenals of a number of countries, especially China, witnessed an increase last year, while other nuclear powers continue to modernize their tools in the context of escalating geopolitical tensions. The report said the size of China's nuclear arsenal has increased from 350 warheads in January 2022 to 410 in January 2023. And it is expected to keep growing. Meanwhile, the Chinese foreign minister commented on the matter by reaffirming his country's commitment to a defensive nuclear strategy and safeguarding its own legitimate security interests.
China always follows a defensive nuclear strategy, maintains its nuclear force at the lowest level required for national security, and does not target any country. China abides by the policy of no first use of nuclear weapons at any time, and under any circumstances, and unconditionally promises not to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states and nuclear weapon-free zones. China is the only nuclear weapon state that adopts this policy. China will continue to be firmly committed to safeguarding its own legitimate security interests and maintaining world peace and stability.
And in the same context, the Chinese Foreign Ministry described allegations by the Wall Street Journal report of reaching an agreement with Cuba to build an electronic airdropping station on the island as false, adding that the U.S. had no chance to drive a wedge between China and Cuba. Wang Wenbin slammed the U.S. for spreading inconsistent information over the past few days.
Over the past 2 days, U.S. officials and media have spread a series of inconsistent information on the so-called Chinese spy facilities in Cuba. This is another show of a self-contradictory. It is my belief that there is no confounding what is true and what is false. With all the slanders and smears, the U.S. has no chance to drive a wedge between China and Cuba, which shares sincere friendship, nor can it cover up its deplorable record of indiscriminate mass eavesdropping and spying around the world.
For his part, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated on Monday that China conducted an upgrade of its intelligence collection facilities in Cuba in 2019, while White House spokesperson John Kirby stated that the United States has made its concern known to the Cuban government about Cuba hosting Chinese spy operations on its territory.
We were briefed on a number of sensitive efforts by Beijing around the world to expand their overseas logistics, basing, collection infrastructure to allow them to project and sustain military power at a greater distance. They were considering a number of sites around the world for that expansion, including intelligence collection, facilities for intelligence collection in Cuba. In fact, based on the information we have, the PRC conducted an upgrade of its intelligence collection facilities in Cuba in 2019.
Nothing's changed about the fact that we understand the bilateral relationship with China is tense right now. And nothing's changed about the fact that the president wants to keep the lines of communication open with the PRC. Some of the, and we talked about this last week, some of the important lines of communication, military to military, are not open. And we want to get them back open.
Uganda has long struggled to protect its forests amid population explosion that has heightened the need for cheap plant-based energy sources, especially charcoal, despite the authorities' executive order at banning its commercial production in the area. More with Salman Nasib.
The burning of charcoal, an age-old practice in many African societies, and is preferred in many households, especially for the poor, seen as an ideal in the preparation of certain dishes that require slow cooking. However, now charcoal is a restricted business across northern Uganda, as it has long struggled to protect its forests, amid a wave of resentment by locals.
We have something which we are depending. But because even though in the state house I think they are using charcoal, even the parliament they are using charcoal, even those people, even those policemen who are coming to beat us, they are cooking with the charcoal, and they know that they are burning charcoal from tree. We are not here to spoil the environment. We are here by their order.
Charcoal production persists despite the presidential order, as well as an anti-climate change law empowering local authorities to regulate harmful activities, as its production in the country has long been the scene of sustained forest destruction.
The drought that we are experiencing in northern Uganda and above all in our district of Gulu, it is as a result of this destruction. And also we realize that these people who are destroying this environment, they are not the indigenous of this place.
Some 25 to 35% of climate-changing greenhouse gas emissions come from so-called biomass burning, which also includes seasonal fires intentionally set to clear land for agriculture. However, local investors who desire the land mostly for its potential to sustain the charcoal business are not against the idea of burning it.
We're not stopping charcoal burning because we have nothing else to do. We're not going to engage in robberies. Maybe if people in the north stop selling their trees, what else can they do? I know everyone uses charcoal. Even members of parliament use charcoal in their homes. It helps us all.
In the absence of a viable alternative, and with some cities almost entirely dependent on charcoal for cooking, Uganda's citizens' need for cheap plant-based energy sources keeps defying the authorities' executive banning order.
The end of our program. Thank you for watching. Till next time, bye-bye.